Hey, Pastor Josh here. We're reading Acts chapter 7, verses 1 through 5, and Jesus commands us to go. He commands us to be about his business. And in fact, this sermon that Stephen is getting ready to preach, which will be his last sermon, it will be the sermon that will incite violence against him. He talks about how God sends Abraham out. And so you see, it is a normal request of God for us to get out of our comfort zone, for us to go. And in particular, as Christians, everything that we do in our going in and out as we go to work and as we even move places and as we start new seasons of our life, the tenor of our life, the basic actions that we should be about is sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. And so we have now come to this part. This is a very lengthy sermon. The entire chapter 7 is Stephen's sermon. And so we will actually be walking through Stephen's sermon line by line, verse by verse for the rest of this month, looking at and examining every single thing that he is going to say. Most people know about Stephen, most Christians anyway, know about Stephen being the first martyr, and know about him being stoned, and even know about the Apostle Paul, before he was Saul, and a hater of Christians, how he held the clothes of the folks that stoned Stephen. But most people have not taken an intense look at his sermon, and it is a great sermon. It's a good exercise in biblical theology. He really takes us from the beginning, Genesis 12 anyway, and he shows us the overarching story of Scripture all the way to Jesus. So we see in Stephen just a dedication to the Lord, being willing to speak and say what is right when he knows that the people that are listening to him will not receive it. So that is encouraging in and of itself. But then also the content of his sermon is very helpful to help us understand the entire big picture story of Scripture. So let's jump in to Stephen's sermon. And the high priest said, "Are these things so?" If you remember from yesterday's reading, is that Stephen was accused of speaking against the temple and speaking against the law of Moses, speaking against all the sacrifices and the institution that was set up in the temple, and then speaking against the Ten Commandments and all the various law codes that then came from the Ten Commandments that the Lord shared and spoke and commanded the Israelites to do. So the high priest is saying, "Buddy, Stephen, is this so? Do you not like the temple? Do you not like the Ten Commandments? Are you against the law? Are these things so?" And Stephen is then going to take a biblical theology approach. He's going to talk about the whole storyline of Scripture and tell them why it is not so that he's against the temple and against the law. And it's, again, very helpful for us as Christians to understand how we get to some of the positions we get to as Christians. Why do we not sacrifice lambs? Why don't we sacrifice animals? Why don't we have a temple? The church is not a temple. It's a building we gather together to worship. So why is that the case? Why are there particular laws within the Old Testament that we do not follow anymore? Well, why? This sermon gives us a lot of those answers. So here's what he says. He starts out with saying, "Father, brothers and fathers, hear me." He's making an impassionate plea saying, hey, we're friends, guys. We don't need to be against each other. Fathers, brothers, hear me. "The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia." So you already see the brotherly language he's trying to foster here. Brothers, fathers, our father Abraham spoke to him when he was in Mesopotamia before he lived in Haran. Those of you that remember, when we walked through the book of Genesis, we know that Abraham left Mesopotamia, the land of Ur, and he stayed in Haran for a time before he actually came to the promised land. So Stephen's saying, hey, when he was in the land of Ur, more than likely when he was worshiping some moon god, the real God spoke to him and said to him, "Go out from your land and from your kindred and go into the land that I will show you." Uncomfortableness. God is asking Abraham to be uncomfortable. Go out. Go out from your land, leave, change. And this is the same command that he has for us today. We are to go out. We should get uncomfortable for God. God needs us and wants us to do things that are uncomfortable, that are in obedience to him. And one of the primary ways that we go out and that we get uncomfortable is that we talk about Jesus to people who don't necessarily want to hear about it. There are tactful and good ways to do it, but we should be making Jesus unignorable, as we try to say around here at Central Baptist Church. We do not want people to come in contact with us, our institution, our services, our people, without with the ability to ignore Jesus. We want them to have to make a decision about Jesus. So he says, go out from your land and from your kindred and go into the land that I will show you. Then he went out. Abraham listened. He was obedient. He followed the example. Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans, or the Chaldeans, and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God removed him from there into this land in which you are now living. He was in Haran. He was listening to the Lord. He is getting uncomfortable. And it says that the Lord, he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length. And we saw that when we looked through the book of Genesis. Abraham did not own any of that property. In fact, the only piece of property he owned was a grave. But God promised to give it to his descendants, but promised to give it to him as a possession and to his offspring after him, though he had no child. A great promise of God. And we, and even in our heads, we need to always remember there's a generation, there's 2 generations, there's 3 generations, there's people coming after us. And so what are we doing to steward the knowledge, the things that God has given us, and properly pass it on to the next generation? We should always be living for the next generation, laying ourselves down so that they can be more prosperous in the gospel and in the things of God, and make sure that they are moving things forward in for the things of God and for godliness. God promises to God promised to Abraham to give the promised land to Abraham's descendants. And I wonder, what are we passing on as a church to the next generation? Are we going to give them a good building? Are we going to give them good resources? Are we going to give them good structures? Are we going to give them good examples of godliness? Are we going to give them good examples of commitment to local evangelism? Are we going to give them a picture and a model of a commitment to world missions, getting on airplanes and going places and digging into our pockets and supporting missionaries and sending people out that are called to do it, and planting churches in places that don't have many churches, and reaching the 36,000 people that live in Whitley County, reaching the 28,000 live within 5 miles of Central Baptist Church? Are we going to show them a commitment to go on mission and to go and make Jesus unignorable? I hope we are. I hope that's what we're going to be passing on to the next generation. That's what I want to do, but we've got to recommit ourselves to that every single day, every single week. And remember that God calls us to go, calls us to get uncomfortable. I pray that has been a blessing to you. I'll see you in the next video.